Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this tutorial, we'll be learning how to cut and sew this beautiful dress with a detachable underbust corset. If this seems like something you're interested in, do well to hit on the subscribe button, turn on your post notification, give this video a thumbs up, and let's dive right into this tutorial. In the previous tutorial, we went about the drafting and the cutting out of this pattern on our fabric. For those of you that haven't seen that, I'll be putting the link in my description box so you can check that out. Now, what we have here is our front piece. I'm just going to go ahead and take out the pattern papers and also take out my lining. So I'll show you guys what we'll be doing. So what we'll be doing here basically is to stitch down the side and the center front together. I'm going to place this part on the right side of the center front, and I'm going to go ahead and pin this down. We'll be stitching this down using 1/2 inch stitching allowance. I'm going to do the same thing to this other side here. Pin it down just like I'm doing here. And we are going to stitch the both sides down using 1/2 inch stitching allowance. Now make sure that the same thing you are doing here is the same thing you are going to do on your lining. For the back piece, you can see that we already cut it out here. We did this in the previous tutorial. Make sure that first of all you notch your dart point on your fabric and your lining, just like I've done here. I'll just be taking out the pattern paper and I'll be separating the pieces this way. Now go ahead and place your lining on the right side of each of these pieces. What you need to do here is to first of all stitch down your dart. Now what you'll be doing here is to stitch it down only on the zipper side. Do not stitch down the neckline. You'll understand further in the tutorial why I said you shouldn't stitch down the neckline yet. After stitching down the front piece, you can see how this came out. Now go ahead and notch your stitch just like I'm doing here. Make sure to give this a really good press, and you can see here that I did the same thing on my lining. After ironing my seams open, you can see how beautiful this came out. I also did the same thing to my lining. Now I'm just going to turn this to the right side and I'll be bringing in my collar. So this is the collar here, and it's meant to be on this area of the front piece. But before we attach it, you know we cut out 2 pieces for the collar. We'll have to stitch down this lower part of the collar here. As you can see, I've already pinned it down. So we'll be stitching this down using 0.5 inch stitching allowance. I'm also going to bring in my yoke and I'll be taking out the pattern paper. You know we also cut out 2 pieces for the collar, and we are going to be stitching down this side using 0.5 inch stitching allowance. So don't forget, it's this area that I'm pinning down that we'll be stitching. Okay, so we'll be stitching down this part using 0.5 inch stitching allowance. After stitching that down, I made sure that I stitched this down towards the lining on the collar just to make sure that it stays in place and it looks neat. On the yoke, I'm also going to be turning this to the right side. I'll trim off the excess that I have there, then I'm going to turn this to the right side like this. I'll go ahead and give this a really good press. You can see how beautiful this came out after giving this a good press. This is what you should have. Okay, now I'm going to bring in my front piece, and what I'm going to do now, something I want to explain before we proceed, is that when you are stitching down your lining, make sure that it's in the opposite direction of what the main fabric looks like. As you can see mine here, if I turn this now to the right side of the main fabric, you can see that it sits how it's meant to be. Now I'm going to bring in my collar and I'm going to place it on my front piece like this. Then bringing in the yoke, make sure that you place the yoke where that armhole is starting from. So I'm just going to check to be sure that I'm placing this well. And to cover everything up, you'll be using your lining. Place it right side to the main fabric. Make sure to go ahead and pin this down. Now after pinning this down, we'll be stitching this down using 0.5-inch stitching allowance, okay? And after doing that, make sure that you notch around your stitch and stitch down everything towards the lining to help keep it in place. After stitching it down, you can see what I have here, and like I said, make sure to stitch this down towards the lining as I've done here, and also go ahead to notch this all the way around. What I'm going to do now is to cut out the excess so that this doesn't look bulky from the inside. After cutting out the excess, go ahead and give this a really good press. After giving this a good press, you can see how beautiful this came out. Now for the back piece, you can see that I've gone ahead to stitch down my darts like I instructed, and I stitched down the lining and the fabric together at the zipper side. For the neckline, you remember I said we shouldn't stitch this down. Now the reason why I said this is because we want the width of the shoulder on the back and on the front piece to be the same. Now I'm going to place the shoulder of the back and the front together like this. I'm going to go ahead and pin this down. And you can see here that the shoulder width of the front piece on this side is smaller than the back piece, and you can't work like this. So I'm just going to pin down the other side like this. I'm going to go ahead and align them properly. What we're going to do in here is to make them the same length at the shoulder. So to do that, I'm just going to be using my chalk to trace out from this part here into the center front, just to make sure that the shoulder width on both the back and the front becomes the same. I'll be doing the same thing to this other side. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out this part, this excess that we have here. Yeah, you can see now that the shoulder width for the front at the back are now the same. So now we can work with this. Just go ahead and unpin this from the front piece. Then I'm going to turn this backwards, and I'll be stitching down the neckline using 1/2-inch stitching allowance. I'm just going to pin that down. So don't forget, you stitch it down using 1/2-inch stitching allowance. Make sure to do the same thing to both sides of your back piece. After doing that, I've gone ahead to turn it over to the right side, and I've given this a really good press. The next thing we'll be doing now is to join the front and the back together at the shoulder. And to join them, place your front piece right sides to the back piece like this. Now what we'll be doing here is to place it fabric to fabric and lining to lining, just like I'm doing here. Go ahead and pin this down like this and stitch this down using 1/2-inch stitching allowance. I'll be doing the same thing to this other side. Place it fabric to fabric and lining to lining. Pin this down and stitch this down using 0.5-inch stitching allowance. Now after doing this, you can see how beautiful this came out. We have this with an inseam finish. As you can see, the seams are inside. Now this is what you want to achieve. Now we are done with this upper part for now. We are going to go ahead and work on the lower part of this dress. I have this piece of fabric for the front piece, and for the length, what I have here is 30 inches. And the reason why mine is this short is because I used just 3 yards of fabric for this dress. So make sure to use 3.5 or 4 yards to be on the safer side. For the width of this, I have about 52 inches. Now what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be making a loose stitch at the upper part of this fabric, and then I'm going to go ahead and gather it to give me my exact waistline in front. Okay, now for the back piece, I also have this piece of fabric here. I have 2 pieces, one for each side of the back piece. For the length, I also have 30 inches, and for the width I have about 26 inches. Now what I'll be doing here also is to create a loose stitch at the top of this place, but note that we'll be having a zipper at the back, so make sure that you leave 1 inch at this end here for your zipper and gather the rest of the waistline. Now I'm just going to bring in the upper part. I'm done gathering my down part, and you can see what I have there for the front piece. Now I'm just going to make sure that the upper part and the down part are the same at the waistline. if you don't want gathers, you can pleat this on the upper part instead. Now make sure that you stitch down the lining and the main fabric at the sides just to hold them down together. Notch the midpoint of your upper part and also notch the midpoint of the down part. Now go ahead and place them together, right sides facing each other. You'll be stitching this down using 0.5 inch stitching allowance. We'll be repeating the same thing on the lower part of this dress. Make sure to first of all stitch down the main fabric and the lining at the side, hold them down together, then bring in your down part. As you can see here, I've gathered it, but I left about 1 inch towards the end for the zipper allowance. Now go ahead and place this right sides facing each other. You'll be stitching this down using 0.5 inch stitching allowance, and make sure to do this to both sides of your back piece. After stitching this down, you can see how beautiful this came out. This is what yours should look like. Now the next thing you'll be doing is to insert your sleeve. To do that, I'm just going to trim out my armhole this way, and I'll be taking the measurement of what I have around the armhole. Now note that I'm inserting sleeves on both sides of the armhole. If you want to insert one just like the original dress, you can go ahead and do that. After taking the measurement of what I have around my armhole, I had 20 inches. So this is what I'll be using to cut out my sleeve. For the sleeve, I've already gone ahead to put my fabric on fold. As you can see here, I folded it into 2 and I went ahead to fold it into 2 again. And this is because I'll be cutting out the both sides of the sleeve together. And I have a lining under which I also did the same way. Come down from the top of your fabric by 0.5 inch and mark a straight line. Then from that point, you're going to mark down 5 inches as your bicep line. Connect this with a straight line. Then mark half of your armhole on this line. For me, it's 20 divided by 2, so I'm going to mark 10 inches. Then connect from this point into this upper part with a straight line. I'll just be using my free hand to do this because this fabric kind of moves around a lot. Then divide what you have on that straight line by 2 like I'm doing here. Now from here, you're going to go up by 0.5 inch and connect it with a curve to the upper part. I'm come down by about 0.5 inch and connect it to the down part with a curve also, just like I'm doing here. The next thing you're going to do now is to mark the length of the sleeve. For me, I'll be using 8 inches, so I'm just going to mark that there. And then I'll be marking half of my upper arm on this line. My upper arm is about 14 inches, so I'm going to be marking this at 7.5. Then I'll be connecting it this way. To give this sleeve a little bit of design, I'm going to come up from this point by 0.5 inch and connect it back. Now we are done drafting out the sleeve. Just go ahead and cut this out like I'm doing here. Do not forget to notch the midpoint of your sleeve. Now after doing that, make sure to trim down the lower part of the lining by about 0.5 inch, okay? Now opening up my sleeves, I have 2 pieces of the main fabric and 2 pieces of the lining. Placing the lining on the main fabric, you can see here that it is about 0.5 inch shorter than the main fabric, okay? This is to help to give us a seamless finish. Now I'm going to place it at the length like this. I'm going to place it at the length and I'll be stitching it down using 0.5 inch stitching allowance. After stitching this down, I've turned it to the right side and I gave this a good press. You can also see here that I stitched it towards the lining just to make sure this stays in place. Now I'm going to bring in my dress and I'm going to place my sleeve on the main fabric like this. Make sure that the notch part is on the shoulder where the front and the back shoulder joins. Then go ahead and pin this down. We'll be stitching this down using 0.5 inch stitching allowance, and I'll be doing this on both sides of my sleeve. After stitching this down, you can see how beautiful this sleeve came out. This is what you want to achieve. The next thing you'll be doing now is to insert your zipper. So you have to determine where you want your zipper to end. Then you mark that point and stitch down what you have left at the center back all the way to the length of the dress. Then after you are done doing that, you'll be taking out your body measurement on the dress and you'll be stitching this down from the sleeve all the way into the length of the dress. And when you are done doing that, you are going to hem the end of the dress. Now we'll be working on the underbust corset. For my underbust corset, I have the lining here and I have the main fabric. On the lining, I went ahead to iron my hairstay on it. You can iron both on your main fabric and your lining if you please, but my fabric has weight, so ironing it only on the lining was okay for me. And also, we cut this in our previous tutorial. I'll be bringing in the back piece, and you can see here that I also have the lining and the main fabric for the back piece. What I'll just be doing here basically is to use the lining to illustrate. I'm going to plait the back side on the right side of the front piece and then stitch this down using 1-inch stitching allowance. I'm using 1-inch stitching allowance because I added 1-inch stitching allowance when I was cutting this out. After doing that, you can see how this looks. I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess that I have on the main fabric and on the lining. After doing this, the next thing you are going to do is to place them right sides facing each other. Go ahead and pin down the ends and you will stitch this down using 0.5-inch stitching allowance. After stitching it down, this is how it came out. I'll just be trimming off the excess that I have here also. Then I'm going to go ahead and give this a really good press. Make sure to give this a good press to help your underbust corset to come out really nice. You can see how mine looks here. The next thing we are going to do now is to create our boning channels. And to do this, I'll just be turning this to the wrong side. I want to draw this on the wrong side so it doesn't look tacky at the front. So what I'm just going to do is to get the midpoint here and down below. I'll connect this with a straight line. Now the width of the boning channel I'll be using is going to be 0.5-inch width. I've already drawn out my boning channel on this side. I'm just going to repeat the same thing on this other side. Come out from this point by 0.75-inch and at this lower part here, come out by 3 inches and connect it with a straight line. I'll be using 0.5-inch as the width as we already know, so I'll just mark that across on this line and connect it together. For the last one, I'm going to come out by 1 inch on this lower part, and this upper part here I'm going to come out by 0.5-inch. I'll mark that there, then connect this with a straight line and also add my 0.5-inch and connect it with a straight line. After creating the boning channels for the front, to create that for the back, what you need to do is to come in from here by 1 inch. This 1 inch we are marking is going to be for the eyelet space. Now after doing that, you are going to create 1/2-inch boning channel after this line. I'll be creating 2 boning channels. After creating the boning channel, you can see what I have here. You can see how beautiful the channel looks. This is what you should have. I already went ahead to iron out a bias using my fabric, which I'll be using to finish the upper and the lower part of this underbust corset. But before we do that, we'll be inserting our boning, and for my boning I'll be using a Reginald boning to do this. Now you can go ahead and use any boning of your choice or what you have available, but for me I'll be using this. So what I'm going to do is to cut out a boning for each of those channels. Make sure that your boning is 0.5-inch away from the top and 0.5-inch away from the lower part. So I'll be cutting out boning for each of these channels. After cutting out the boning, you will notice here that my boning is kind of curved. Since this can take iron, I will just go ahead and iron it flat. After ironing it, you can see what I have here. Now before I proceed to insert this into my channels, make sure to use a lighter to melt the upper and the lower part just so it's smooth, so that when you're inserting it into your channel it's easier and it doesn't poke the fabric from the inside. So I'm done doing it here, and you can see mine. I'll just be inserting my bonings into each of my channels. After inserting the boning, this is what I have. You can see how it looks on the wrong side. Now the next thing we'll be doing here is just to finish off the upper and the lower part of this underbust corset using our bias. So you just sew down your bias the way you would normally do. I'll start with the back, I'll place it this way and I'll stitch it down all the way to the end, then turn it over and finish it off. Now after inserting the bias, you can see how beautiful this came out. This is pretty easy. The next thing we'll be doing here is to insert the eyelet. I don't have an eyelet machine yet, so I'll be going to the market to do this. So after inserting my eyelet, you can see how beautiful this came out. And guys, I also got some beads, to add more shine to my dress, and you can see how beautiful this looks. I also went ahead to use a bias to create a lace for the eyelet, and this is what I have. And yeah, that's it for this tutorial. I hope this tutorial was really helpful. Please do let me know in the comment section, and also if you have any questions, you can leave it there in the comment section. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, turn on your post notification to know when we post a new tutorial. I'll see you guys in my next one.